First reason is that the venture capital model is broken. And what do I mean by broken? Well, the first thing to keep in mind is that in the year 2000, 15 years ago, there were over 1,000 venture capitalists in the US. Venture capital companies, I'm sorry, not more than that in terms of venture capitalists. 1,000 venture capital companies. Now, just 15 years later, there's half of that, just 500 companies. And returns still look good for the very top venture capitalists, the top quartile. Returns are still very good. But for the rest of the venture capitalists, and that's 75% of them, returns, particularly on the latest fund, and I'm not saying anything about the venture capitalists in the audience here, but 75% of the venture capitalists are showing returns less than the stock market, less than the US stock market. So what that means is for their investors, they're producing returns that are not commensurate with the risk of venture capital. And so these venture capitalists are worried. And that means that these 400 VC firms are looking for new ways to fund. And so what are they doing that's different? Well, one thing they're doing is they're funding more early-stage companies. In fact, 10 years ago, out of all the venture investments that were done in the US, about 1/3 of them were for seed and early-stage rounds at the very beginning of a startup. And then just 13 years later, now over half of those investments, those rounds, are for seed and early stage. So that means they've increased the proportion from 1/3 to 1/2 in 15 years. And so those VCs are looking for value by investing earlier. Another thing is about price. In 2012 and 2013, when an entrepreneur put out his price for a round, it would increase maybe 50% to the next round. Just last year, if you look at the statistics, this most recent year, that has increased to 70 to 100%. And what that means is entrepreneurs, which is very good for the entrepreneur, they've seen prices increase almost double each time they go back for investment. However, and one other fact that I wanted to mention is money raised before an IPO for companies that were going public used to be just in 2010, 50 million. The average company used to raise 50 million before it went public. Now it's estimated that they're raising 100 million. And what that means before they go public, and what that means is VCs are putting more money into companies before they go public to try to get better returns. However, venture capitalists are also looking, so those are the methods they're using, but they're also looking beyond their borders to find more value in their investments because Silicon Valley really is overheated. Those numbers that I mentioned show a trend that is not sustainable. It cannot go on. So even though it might be good for the entrepreneur now, it is not going to be good. It cannot continue long term. And the venture capitalists know that, and so they're looking for other ways because it's just too overheated. So that's why I say it's a good time to be an entrepreneur, particularly in Greece. So let me tell you why, and I see a couple skeptical faces in the audience, but let me try to convince you. First of all, both companies and capital are much more mobile than before. In fact, over the next several years, do not be surprised if you see investors competing for investment here. And I'm not surprised when I see entrepreneurs from other countries come into the US looking for investment as well. It truly is more mobile, both the companies and the capital. And I believe, and I think this echoes what Jim said, that if you create something special that's truly valuable to the customer, if you can show that value, which Jim said, that is what the venture capitalist is looking for, that venture capitalist will invest. Now, I'm not suggesting that you can just sit there and hope that they'll find you in Greece, but I am suggesting that if you do create something special and you do some other things, which I'll talk about, then you will be able to get investment, and you will find that this is a good moment. And it particularly will go work for you if you look at your market long-term as not just Greece, but other countries, if not world domination. So my format is similar to Professor Latin. I'm going to talk about some lessons from successful entrepreneurs, and then I'm going to leave plenty of time, I hope, for Q&A. Let's take a look at our first lesson. The most successful companies and entrepreneurs start with a big idea. Now, I'm often asked, how do I know if it's a big idea? And what I tell people is your idea, the product you're thinking about, 10 times better than what is out there in the market? And my friends who are scientists or engineers, they'll say, well, how do I know if it's 10 times better? I'm a consumer product. Is it 8 or 9? And the point is not whether it's 8 or 9 or 11 times better. It's that it just can't be 2 or 3 times better. It has to be an order of magnitude of improvement. Another clue that I've seen that there's a big idea is that there are disbelievers. And this may sound a little counterintuitive, that I'm actually looking for disbelievers out there. But what I find is that if there are disbelievers, if everybody agrees that it's already a good idea, it's usually either been done or it's not a huge leap in benefit. So I'm looking for those disbelievers that say that idea can't be done. Now, not the entrepreneur, but some of the people that are experts in the marketplace. I've also noticed that the founders of a big idea know the market better than their existing players. They really understand their competition. They really understand who their potential partners are. And as you build this big idea, I'm often asked, will you still have a life? And I apologize, but I think you know the answer is no. There are some exceptions, and I've mentored a few that are able to have some balance, but I think you know this startup takes 100% of your commitment at times, and it really is hard to have a balance in life. The second lesson is to define the problem. And that's when the entrepreneur asks, what is the customer's unmet need? What is the problem that I'm truly trying to solve? What's wrong with current solutions? Are they too costly? Do they take too much time? Are they too complicated? For example, and I will use an example of Uber, or I think you know the local company Taxi Beat. What is their primary benefit? Is it a lower price for the consumer? Is it quicker service? Is it a better customer experience? I think that's something that I've seen entrepreneurs that are very successful do, is really think about what is the problem that they're trying to solve. And it's also important to understand, and I think Jim referenced this, Professor Latin referenced this as well, who is the customer? Is this problem that we're solving the number 1 or 2 problem, or is it way down on the list? Is it number 8 or 9 or 10? And what I've found as a venture capitalist, that unless you're solving your customer's number 1 or 2 problem, you're not going to end up having the very large market that you hope for. And sometimes, if you're solving that 8 or 9, that number 8 or 9 or 10 on the list that's way down, you might get some interesting customers, and you might have a very interesting, what we might call lifestyle business. But it's not going to be something that should be venture-backed, and it's not going to be this huge, big idea. Now, how else do I know if there's a big idea and a big problem out there? My expression, and it's the one I use, is that there's a line at the door. And you can look at this even if the product is just an idea stage. It's very possible to test the product with potential customers. And it's a very powerful message if there is a line at the door. And in fact, my favorite scenario is when an entrepreneur, as and a present company accepted, are good at telling stories to investors. And sometimes they are true, and sometimes they're a bit exaggerated. But I do like to hear this story. And the story I like to hear is I worked my product, I developed it, and I put it out to customers just on a trial, on a beta test, just to 15 or 20 customers. But those customers happened to tell some of their friends, and all of a sudden, instead of just having 15 or 20 in my trial, I ended up with 50 customers in my trial. There was that line at the door of customers that wanting to get in. Now, that's the type of story that I like to hear. Notice that I'm not saying they have to have millions of dollars of revenue. I'm just looking for that initial line at the door of customers coming in. Quite often, a new idea will create other problems that you can solve as an entrepreneur. And this happened, for example, with eBay. eBay became very successful, and however, it needed a peer-to-peer payment system. So PayPal, that was a very small company at the time, realized this and became the payment system for eBay. So here was a problem that eBay had created, and PayPal ended up with explosive growth because of that. Now, the third lesson is, I think, one of the most difficult to achieve, and that is to build a great founding team. And it's about adding two very important individuals, a co-founder or co-founders, and your mentor. And I say that modestly. But the important thing is to make sure that these people you add are different. And I think it's quite natural for entrepreneurs to want to surround themselves with people that are just like him or her. But I'm encouraging you, when you think about your co-founders and your mentors particularly, and I think Christos will vouch for me on this, look for mentors and partners that are very different. In fact, I can give you some examples. One of the most famous is Google, with Sergey Brin and Larry Page, who are very different individuals, and they had their mentor as Eric Schmidt, who is also very different than those two. Or the one case that I like, particularly if you've seen the movie about Apple, of the very opposite personalities of Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, two very different individuals. And I'm not sure if John Scully, they would consider their mentor, but if you saw the movie, maybe not in terms of how they portrayed him. The most successful entrepreneurs do keep a very high standard, though, as they build their team. Now, lesson 4 is a mistake that I've seen even the most experienced and successful entrepreneurs make, but the very successful entrepreneurs do get it right. They know their competition, and I think this is important for this audience, is they know their competition around the world. They look at the sector in a fresh way, and they take a very broad definition of competition. In fact, as an investor, when an entrepreneur gives me their slide pitch, and I typically get this pitch with the company, the competitors down, and all this feature list, and they show one column where their product does excellent on every of the features. Do you recognize the slide? Because it's universal among entrepreneurs when they pitch to a venture capitalist. And then for the competitors, they may put 1 or 2 check marks just to show that they're being generous. Well, that worries me. That's what I call a warning flag, because I'm not seeing them know and respect their competition. And I know they'll have a balanced view of their competitors when they talk to me about their competitors and say, I know they have very good customer service, but they're not very good at sales, when they recognize this. And I think this is an important thing, even for experienced entrepreneurs, to keep in mind. I also encourage you to be prepared for the competitor's response. And this is another mistake I see entrepreneurs make. Of course, the competitor is going to respond to your introduction. In fact, the better your product, the better your company does, the more vigorous the competitive response. But that's why I said earlier that your product has to be, at least at the start, 10 times better. because that competitor is working on their product while you've been working on yours, and they're going to come out with their new release that is probably 1 or 2 times better. That's why you need to be 10 times better and be prepared for that competitive response. Now, the 5th lesson is one that I often get asked. In fact, some would say this is really the secret to Silicon Valley's success. And that is the most successful entrepreneurs are prepared to fail. They're ready to fail. In fact, they're more likely to fail than succeed. And by example, I will give you an example of just a generic venture fund and give you the stats on that for an early stage venture fund. An early stage venture fund, let's say of $100 million, will invest in maybe 15 companies. Now, 8 to 10 of those companies are going to fail. That means the investor is going to get 0 from that, and the entrepreneur is going to end up having to do something else and start a new company. But what I'm trying to explain is it's very typical for our funds for 2/3 of the investments to fail. Now, 3 or 4, maybe 3 more of those investments will end up getting 3 or 4 times our money in terms of investment, so there'll be good returns. But 1 or 2 of them, if we're lucky and good, will end up to be 20 or 30 times our original investment. But that's a typical profile for venture capitalists, and it kind of gives you a sense on what the failure ratio is out there. Now, what I'd like for the people in the audience to think about, not just the entrepreneurs, is whether your company is ready to allow for failures as an option. And if you're not, it usually means you're not pushing your idea to that 10 times. Because, as I mentioned before, the majority of ideas will fail. In fact, if you consider the case of Jack Dorsey and Evan Williams at a company called Odeo, which was the predecessor of Twitter, Apple introduced a product that just killed their first product, killed Odeo's first product. So the original Odeo idea was not a success, and they offered their investors their money back. And some of them actually took their money back. But when they tried again with a product that we now know as Twitter, they became a huge success. And I know some of those investors are regretting getting their money back initially. But it just shows you that even some of the biggest successes started out with a failure. So the amazing part of the Silicon Valley culture, and I don't know, maybe it's too optimistic to think that it might be part of Greek culture going forward, is that you'll allow the entrepreneur to fail and then try again and again. And the question I'm asking you is, will your company, your culture, allow for that? Whether you're an entrepreneur working for a university or even in a government agency, will the projects be ambitious enough so that it's acceptable for 1 or 2 of those projects to fail? Something to think about. What if 1/2 of the projects were to fail? Would your company be as ambitious as that? Will you even keep the employees who try and fail? In Silicon Valley, we encourage them to try again with further investment, even those entrepreneurs that have failed before. That's the way to encourage, to get that reach for 10 times. So what I'm trying to say, it's not about failure. It's about reaching high, something that we're able to encourage in Silicon Valley, and I think for some entrepreneurs here. But it'd be great to see more entrepreneurs reaching high. The thing we would have to tolerate is a little more, or maybe a lot more, failure. But that's something we're able to do in Silicon Valley. Now, lesson 6 is probably the most important advice, or the important lesson of the evening. The most successful entrepreneurs do not take advice, except this advice. And what I mean by that is that they're very selective about the advice they take. And I think, I can't explain how successful entrepreneurs do that, but they just do. And I don't want to put Christos on the spot and ask him how he knew which of my advice to take and which of my advice not to take. But he became very successful because he was able to figure that out. And I'm being quite serious when I say the most successful entrepreneurs, they listen to all the advice, but they only take the advice they feel they need. And as an entrepreneur, you can get bombarded by advice from well-meaning advisors. And the point I'm trying to make is the most successful entrepreneurs know which advice to take. Unfortunately, I can't explain how they do that, but maybe Christos can tell his secrets later on. Lesson 7, this one is aptly numbered because entrepreneurs are lucky. It's just something that I've noticed, that they're very skilled, they're very good at what they do, but they're very lucky. And I think what we say in the United States, and maybe here as well, is that they make their own luck. And the way they do that is they have a big idea that is 10 times better than the competition. They define the problem very carefully. They don't jump to the solution. So they take a moment to say, what is the problem that I'm truly trying to solve? And they build a great team with different types of personalities. And they know their competition, not just in their home country, but around the world. And most importantly, those most successful entrepreneurs, they don't take my advice. So with that, I'd like to conclude and thank you. Okay, so, sorry. We can open it up to Q&A, and we can take any sort of question, entrepreneurs or investors. It's all open here.
So this appetite for failure, is it constitutional or is it institutional? In Greece, it takes a very long time to close a business, and usually it follows you around for years and years with debts towards public entities, criminal investigations, and long processes in courts. So is it constitutional to have this propensity, or do the institutions need to help?
Well, as those that know me in the audience know, I'm not familiar with the Constitution here and what the laws are. But, okay, but I do think the attitude is really, like you said, maybe in the gut or maybe in the head, that it's mental, that I'm afraid of failure. The entrepreneurs I know are very confident. They think they are going to succeed. In fact, that's another very good trait of the successful and unsuccessful entrepreneurs, is that they're very confident. But what I would say to them, and particularly with the laws here, and no offense to any government officials here, if it isn't able to make your company in Greece, then make it somewhere else. And so there are companies, well, what I mean by that is you can have your company based here, but you can also have part of it based elsewhere in other countries. And I have seen that happen. And so if you feel there's a law that is in your way, then you may have to move your company to another country, or you may have to use part of your, have the majority of your employees somewhere else. But what I'm trying to say is entrepreneurs figure out a way to get through this. They're not pessimistic and say, the laws are stopping me from moving forward. They figure out a way. The entrepreneurs that make excuses, and again, no offense to the part of your question, are the ones that do not end up to be the most successful entrepreneurs. If the entrepreneurs I know that have been most successful, if they see that brick or stone wall, they go through it or around it, but they don't complain about it much at all. I hope that's an answer to your question. And I know I'm in trouble. You should have your company here in Greece. Don't. I've seen successful companies here, and I've seen companies reach here. So I don't think you have to worry about moving. Let's go on to the next question so I can get myself out of trouble here. Go ahead. Oh, here we go.
Just a bit of an addendum. I believe I read somewhere that the mentioned Steve Dupree. He's from Budapest. And I read an article that suggested that he said if you have an idea, you should take it straight to Silicon Valley if you believe in it that much, without, again, stepping on any toes or
right.
what have you.
Not,
I think originally based in Hungary.
Right. And I think the way that I've seen a successful blend of that, I don't know if everybody heard, but the idea of, quote, taking it to Silicon Valley, and I think that's why we've seen so many entrepreneurs literally show up on the doorstep of Silicon Valley from other countries. What I've seen as the most successful model for entrepreneurs in another country is to send 1 or 2 people to Silicon Valley and have them, first of all, understand some of the best practices. They might see competition that they wouldn't see in their home country. But for most companies, it's not practical to move your company to Silicon Valley. It's more expensive there. It doesn't make sense to serve your home market. But I have seen this hybrid model where a couple people go to Silicon Valley and work there, and they've expanded their company that way. And it doesn't have to be Silicon Valley. You could send a couple people to London or to Beijing. The point is you may need a couple people outside of your home country to help you really know your competition or other practices around the world. But thank you for that thought. Yes, we have another question up front, second row.
Hi. I wanted to add to what you just commented. And you are indeed correct. There are some companies that have applied the hybrid model. And I just wanted to ask you, regarding this hybrid model, what they are trying to do is they're trying to keep the core team here, especially if you're talking about development or IP or something like that. Mm-hmm. And they have their business and sales as well as the core team which is seeking VC in the Valley, for instance. Don't you think that if you have a small team in the Valley which, can have a cup of coffee with some VCs, try to be in the place where things happen, is better for a company? And also, to add to that, don't you think that a US VC will look a US-based company differently than it would if it was a Greek-based company, especially with all the things that have been going on in Greece in the recent years?
That's a very good question, because 5 years ago, I would have said yes. As a venture capitalist, I would say most VCs were looking for a US-based company because they felt more comfortable that way. But the bubble I talked about, the value, the returns, VCs within the last 5 or 10 years, and it's kind of ironic, have become more entrepreneurial. There used to be a joke, I don't know how much of a joke it is, they'd say, if you were more than 30-minute drive from Sand Hill Road, you would not get funded. So it wasn't a question of being in California or Silicon Valley. You had to be close by to that VC, otherwise you would not get funded. That's changed remarkably. I see those same VCs going to South America, to Africa, to Europe, because there's this really institutional problem of needing better returns on their investments. So it's gotten them out of their office seat onto planes, going to other countries looking for investments. Where I think it's important to have that Silicon Valley connection is maybe for the investor